we talked a little bit about your cultural background, and you mentioned that both of your parents, came here from China. So you still have family in China, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Do you get back to those roots often? Do you visit? What is your relationship like with your family that is in China?
Oh, this is a really good question. Um, back before COVID, my parents tried to get us back to China every 2 or 3 years, but airplane tickets are horrendously expensive. The flight is like anywhere from 14 to 17 hours. Yikes! Traveling with little kids is awful. I'm so sorry, Mom and Dad. I probably was not helpful to you at all. But I remember the first time I visited China was when I was 5 years old. My brother was 2. So, maybe I wasn't the worst culprit in that situation.
It's always easy to blame the little brother, isn't it?
Yes, for sure. No hate, though. Love him. He's my best friend. But anyways, first time I visited was when I was 5 and he was 2. And we tried to go back every 2 or 3 years since then up until COVID. And I remember in my first early visits to China, it was very much like, oh my goodness, the food here is so good. And I remember meeting my grandparents. My grandparents originally came. I met my grandparents when they came to the United States. They helped babysit us and help around the house for in the first year that I was born and the first year that my brother was born. But my grandparents hate it here because they don't know the language. They can't consume the media. They don't know how to drive, so they were just kind of stuck at home. They made amazing gardens, though. They built these amazing gardens. Trust me, if you ever need gardening advice, my grandparents are the ones to go to for that. But anyways, so when we went to China in the early years, it was very much like oh my goodness, this place is so different, and there's so much good food, and my family's here, and there's look around, there's people who look like me, and that was a very bizarre experience for me because lived in Midland my whole life. And then COVID kind of put a stop to that for a little bit because, obviously the COVID-19 pandemic. And I remember just being super worried for my grandparents all the time because, they're older, they have some health issues, and they were in a really vulnerable position with that pandemic. And also that meant that we couldn't visit them for many, many years. And at that point, my Chinese is still not incredibly good. I've taken Chinese classes since I was in elementary school, but there's still a language barrier. My Chinese proficiency is very much a elementary school level. I could probably, talk to a 3rd grader or 4th grader pretty well, and I can understand most conversational, but there was definitely always a language barrier where I couldn't really talk about anything deeper than day-to-day life and surface level with my grandparents. But after COVID, the first time we visited was over winter break last year, and that was a really I don't know, impactful, I guess is the right word.
Yeah.
Experience to get to see my grandparents after so long, because the last time we had visited before that was 2019. So it was almost 5 years before we got to see them again. And I felt like I had grown up so much in that time period. And some of my cousins didn't recognize me. It was crazy. But just to see my grandparents, and I really tried to make a more intentional effort to connect with them about, some of the more deeper, I guess, and really valuable things in life. And I was asking about their childhoods and them growing up, and we paid homage, honor to our ancestors for the first time. We participated in this tradition where we go and we bow down at our ancestors' graves and it's traditionally you bow your head 3 times to honor your ancestors and everything that they've done for your family. And I found out this was actually pretty emotional for me. I realized that when I was born and when my brother was born, they inscribed our names in stone on my ancestors' graves as these are the living descendants. And that was so powerful for me because I didn't even realize that was something that happened, but it was just hey, no one's forgetting you. Like, you're a part of this family, and this is where your culture and this is where your background is and your heritage, and like these are your physical roots are here. Your name is physically inscribed on this stone. And we got to participate in that tradition. We've never gotten to do that before. And I think it was because my parents were like, you weren't old enough to understand it. And my family was bending the rules a little bit. Like, you're supposed to do that on actual Lunar New Year. We were like a month and a half early, maybe, but they still had us do it anyways. And so that was really meaningful to me to get to like deepen my relationship with my grandparents and participate in those traditions and heritage aspects that I feel like I've missed out on a lot because of growing up here in the United States, because, you know, my nuclear family, my parents and my brother, were the only ones on this hemisphere. So
you talk about that, and we talk about the COVID-19 pandemic and the separation that we all kind of felt from family. But specifically with everything around the COVID-19 pandemic, with you and your family being, you know, specifically from China, that was a very interesting time period, and I couldn't imagine the fear of having, you know, relatives in, you know, a completely different country, especially when they're 15 hours away, where a lot of us were, you know, 20, 30 minutes away from family, and we were still scared here. How do you feel like your experience was a little bit different, specifically with, you know, your family being from China?
Yeah, I would say there's like a lot of levels to that.
And there's stigma involved too, obviously.
Right, yeah. I would say the separation aspect was like something that I was already used to at that point, because I have grown up completely separately from my extended family. And so like it's always just been like my mom, my dad, and my brother, and like that's my core family. And so like the physical separation wasn't too difficult, but I would say like the media polarization on both ends was something that was like kind of it's nothing new, right? But the COVID-19 pandemic really highlighted that and brought that
Put
to
that
life.
microscope on it.
Yeah. And so it was a really interesting scenario to be in, because me and my family, like me and my dad and my mom and my brother, we were always worried for my grandparents and for my cousins and for my aunts, my uncles. And we were like, are you guys okay? Like, and every time the virus would like spread to like a neighboring city or region, we would always get super scared and nervous about that. But meanwhile, on the flip side, our relatives in China, like specifically my grandparents on my dad's side, they were always like, they hated the fact that we were in the United States because of the way the media portrayed, like, and obviously there was a rise in anti-Asian hate due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and they were seeing the videos of like people getting like beat up in the street and like, you know, slurs or like go back to your country, like all that stuff. And that was the media that my grandparents were consuming. And so they were really upset and really, really, really worried for us, like our physical and emotional safety, being Chinese people living in the United States during this COVID-19 pandemic. Even if it's in Midland, like they didn't really know like the context of that or anything, but they were almost more worried for our safety and well-being than we were for theirs, which was
and it's
bizarre.
So different going both ways, because I'm assuming that, you know, when the pandemic, it was always very real, but when it became very real to us, you would probably have already been living that for months, correct? Like, was it kind of earlier for you that this was an extremely large concern?
Yeah, it was actually pretty interesting, because I remember that was my 7th grade year. And before there were any rumors about school getting out or anything like that, we were like, my grandparents and my family in China was hearing about this, and they were shutting down way quicker. And then I remember, like, specifically, the Tri-City Chinese Association Chinese New Year usually happens in like late January, early February. And I remember in 2020, when COVID was happening in China, the Chinese community in Midland was like, we're not doing the celebration this year. Like, it's not happening. And that was before the shutdown that happened, you know, later in March. And already the events and stuff were getting canceled, and the community, like the Chinese community, even in the United States, was already getting very apprehensive and cautious about this whole pandemic. So I would say like it was just a little bit more foreshadowed with that.
Subscribe wherever you consume media. Maxwell's Midland is your entertainment, resources, and collective improvement hub for Midland County. Plan your next adventure in Midland at maxwellsmidland.com.